Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Art Fessler. I'm the Superintendent of Schools, and today we'd like to share our latest information in terms of reopening schools in District 59. Presenting with me today will be Ben Gray, the Assistant Superintendent of Innovative Learning and Communication, Tom Ludloff, Associate Superintendent, Dr. Katie Ossel, Assistant Superintendent of Student Service and Assessment, Ross Vittori, Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, Ron O'Connor, Assistant Superintendent for Business Services, our CSBO, and Maureen McAbee, who is our Assistant Superintendent for Instruction. As you know, Governor J.B. Pritzker released a Reopening Illinois 5-phase plan. Currently, we are in phase 4, which is the revitalization stage of that plan. You can see that in this plan, a few details are that there are gatherings of no more than 50 people in a particular space, and there's some other details that we will get into through the course of our presentation. The CDC and the Illinois Department of Health also provided guidelines for phase 4. Included in these guidelines were safety planning and modifications for school districts. One is to encourage in-person instruction to the greatest extent possible while maintaining a safe environment for students, staff, and families. Must require the use of appropriate PPE, including face coverings. Again, must prohibit more than 50 individuals from gathering in one space, and we'll get into more detail and define those terms as we move through this presentation. Require social distancing as much as possible. Require that schools conduct symptom screenings and temperature checks, or require that individuals self-certify that they can and are free of symptoms before entering school buildings. And finally, require an increase in school-wide cleaning and disinfection. The State Board of Education also released a joint guidance that was a 60-page document that provides a number of specific details. They've had 3 iterations. They've written this in combination with the Illinois Department of Health. District 59 has also been in planning since May. Over the course of that time, we've developed 4 distinct plan teams. The first one is Health, Wellness, and Safety. That committee is chaired by Dr. Katie Ossel. The second is Instruction, chaired by Maureen McAbee. The third is Operations, chaired by Ross Vittori. And the fourth is Communication, which is chaired by Ben Gray. These plan teams also have subcommittees, so the number of people, including administrators, certified staff, non-certified staff, is significant. We have in the neighborhood of 100 different people represented across various schools and buildings working together to develop plans. We have developed some return to school priorities. Again, in-person instruction is a priority. However, doing that as safely as possible, keeping students, staff, and families safe is a key priority. We also want to address the social, emotional, and mental health needs of our students and staff. We also want to maintain coherent learning by creating a scope of standards and learning targets with aligned systems of assessment. This will occur whether we're in person, whether we're virtual, whether we are physically distanced. We also want to pay close attention to equity and access for all of our students. We wanted to design flexibility into school schedules. We want to make sure that we have built-in environments, protocols, and norms for being together in person, physically distanced, or through virtual. And finally, we want to be engaging and connecting with students, staff, and families with clear communication. We've also reached out to our families to gather some initial information to measure their perceptions about the return to school as well as transportation. We will have subsequent surveys this week that we'd also like to share with staff and families to get more information after we reveal this plan. Ben Gray will walk through the survey process and information, and then that will be followed by Tom Ludloff, who will share some of the comments and suggestions from our families. Ben?
Thank you, Dr. Fessler. During the week of July 6th, we administered a family survey. We had 2,356 responses. This slide shows the response demographic broken down by grade levels. We did ask families if families had a student or a child in multiple levels. So if they had a fourth grader and they had a seventh grader, we asked them to take separate surveys to reflect that information based on those grade levels. So based on the responses, 56.2% of the responses were from first through fifth grade, then 30.3% were from sixth through eighth grade, and then 13.5% were pre-K through K. You can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. The two key questions we asked were which choice best describes your plans for your child when in-person learning resumes, and then the transportation question. So focusing on the first question, 58.6% of respondents said that my child will attend school for in-person learning. 28.7% of people said my family is undecided at this point, and 12.7% of people said my child will not attend school for in-person learning. Regarding the best plans for transportation, we had 42.8% of people respond that my child is not eligible for bus transportation, and we utilize a method other than bus transportation to and from school. That question was important because when we looked at what choices parents had, a parent may not be eligible for bus transportation and may choose to do and utilize a different method of transportation. So we wanted to make sure that was an option for parents. But then for us in planning for our transportation, to get an idea of who is eligible and who will utilize transportation services, the blue and the red pie charts become particularly important. So for those who are eligible and will plan to have their child ride the bus to and from school, that was 33.5% of the respondents. And 23.7% said that their child is eligible, but they will find an alternative method. So as we look at those two groups of both groups who are eligible, we see it's a little over 50% for people who are eligible and do plan to ride the bus at this point based on these results. The next slide will break down some of the themes from the open-ended responses, and Tom Ludloff will discuss those results.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. So as part of this process, families had the opportunity to provide comments in connection to their selections. This is a breakdown of some of the key themes that came through that process. As you can see, most of them relate obviously to the safety piece, the structures, how we ensure precautions are in place, and other kind of key safety components. The two main pieces to really highlight in this piece are really towards the bottom of the slide, which showed that a large percentage of families indicated wearing a mask at school for long periods of time was a concern. That flowed across each of the selections, whether it was I plan to send my child or were undecided, and even some who indicated that was an issue who have chosen, at least at this time, to not attend. Also, the ensuring proper precautions are in place, from masks to hand washing, the restrictions in place related to students who are sick or staff who are sick, the screening pieces, that also was a key piece of the comments. In the end, we received over 1,000 comments and broke them down into these categories, of which these are basically about 800 of the key ones that came through that process. So this is helping us as we continue to work on our plan and informing where these different groups of parents fall in regards to information and questions and things. And obviously the families who are undecided have indicated they need more information. That's the purpose of a plan like this. And we're also working on a much more detailed, specific plan that will be provided to families and staff to help in the process. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Fessler, who's going to speak to the options we have developed to date.
Thank you, Tom. So that's some of the background information and some of the foundational work that we've done to get to the point where we're at today. Today, I'd like to share two options that we will roll out for the start of the school year based on phase 4 guidance. Please recognize that if we move to phase 3 or at some point phase 5, the plans will change. But for the reopening or the return to school in phase 4, option 1, in-person instruction. The reopening school plan offers families the option of in-person instruction at CCSD 59 school buildings with social distancing protocols and use of PPE per the current ISB, CDC, and IDPH guidelines. In this model, students will attend classes at their school a minimum of 4 days per week. Most weeks it will be 5 days, but there will be days where we may have a remote learning or plan day, with additional days offered as feasible based on the health safety guidelines. Students are automatically enrolled for in-person instruction if families do not submit their preferred instructional model by the end of July. We will talk more specifically about that in the following slides. There is an option 2. This is called alternative to full person instruction. This will be a remote academy. In this option, the reopening school plan offers families the option of full-time online instruction as a replacement to in-person instruction within CCSD 59 school buildings. Families' decision to participate in this option may be based on concerns about potential harm or exposure to the virus with attending or by attending school sites. This option is available, though, to any family. Parents will need to make a commitment to participate in full remote instruction for an entire grading period. If health conditions improve that would allow CCSD 59 to resume in-person instruction for all students, the district will reassess the status and reserves the right to discontinue this option. Again, we will be conducting surveys with both staff and families in the very near future, and then we will be asking families to select one of these 2 options in late July. That said, in order to bring students back to school, we have a number of safety planning modification in schools, on our buses, and across our district facilities that must be in place. Dr. Russell will talk through the return to school safety protocols. Katie?
Thank you. First and foremost, we want to make sure that we are protecting our staff and students by making sure that everyone is wearing face coverings. So as a district, everyone must wear a face covering that goes from the top of the nose to the bottom of the mouth and fits securely around the face. We will be issuing cloth masks to staff and students, but staff and students may also elect to bring their own cloth masks. And as long as they meet those requirements, that's fine. We encourage people to wash those cloth masks daily. We will also have disposable masks available in the case that a mask gets dirty, gets dropped, or that someone arrives without one. So we will have multiple ways to ensure that everyone is protected by wearing masks. In addition to that, hand hygiene is essential to our health and wellness. So we have strategically placed hand sanitizing stations around our buildings. They can be used upon entry and exit to the school building, entry and exit to lunch or eating areas. And we will also have hand washing routines and hand sanitizer available in our classes. In regards to materials, the best thing to do is to make sure that we're not sharing school supplies or materials when it's not absolutely necessary. So we will have individual school supplies at workstations for students. We will have bottle filling stations rather than using drinking fountains. So bringing a water bottle to work to school would be wonderful to make sure that we're not using those fountains and sharing any germs. And we will also not be using lockers at the junior high level. So belongings will be placed on the back of chairs for students in backpacks so that we are not sharing those spaces. We also have multiple common spaces in our buildings that may need to be repurposed. So we want to have a designated spot for anyone who is exhibiting any symptoms of COVID-19. That may mean that we have to use our gym or our LRC or multi-purpose room differently to adjust to those health and safety needs. We plan for breakfast to be a grab and go breakfast that students can take out the door on their way out of the school each afternoon and take home with them, not eating it on the bus, but eating it at home in the morning the next day before they come to school. We know that there will be a lot of health training required for both staff and students, and so we are planning to utilize days before the student re-entry to school with our staff to ensure that they are familiar and aware and able to implement the health protocols. And we are also planning for social emotional learning lessons for students that will teach healthy practices, like appropriate wearing of cloth masks and hand washing and sanitizing. Upon entry to school, we will have a very specific screening procedure. The Illinois State Board of Education and the Illinois Department of Public Health are requiring that staff and students self-certify that they are symptom-free and fever-free daily before they come to work or before they come to school. In addition to that, we will have temperature screening for rotating groups of students or randomized students or staff upon entry to the building, in addition to that self-certification process. When anyone is exhibiting any illnesses, as stated before, we will have a designated spot in our building that they will go to so that they can isolate and not potentially spread any illnesses. We will make sure that our nurses are available to evaluate those situations on a case-by-case basis. And what's really important for everyone to understand is that anybody who has any of the following symptoms will need to stay home. If there's a fever above 100.4 degrees, if there are respiratory symptoms that are not related to allergies or asthma, if there are gastrointestinal symptoms, an unexplained loss of taste or smell, obviously if there's a positive COVID-19 test, if someone has had close contact with a person with a confirmed positive test, or if there are travel-related restrictions in place, those are points where you would need to stay home from work or from school. If we see at school that someone is exhibiting symptoms, that student will likely need to stay home for 10 days. So a staff member who sees that a student might have a symptom will call down to the office for the nurse. The nurse will report to the classroom, evaluate the situation, of course take into account any pre-existing conditions like allergies or asthma. And if in fact there is a symptom of COVID-19, the nurse would move that student to the isolation spot until they can be picked up from school. There are several criterion that would be met for that student to return to school. And Dr. Fessler, if you could move to the next slide. Thank you. When we have students who are home because they're in quarantine, but they are not ill, those students will be able to access remote learning. So for example, if a student were within 6 feet of someone else who tested positive, we would notify parents immediately that that was the case. And then that student would need to stay home to quarantine and monitor symptoms. During that time, they would be able to access remote learning so that they can continue their learning at home if they're feeling well. We may also have cases where we have COVID-19 in our buildings, and we would look at an individual needing to stay home, a classroom needing to stay home, or potentially even the school. And in those cases, that group would switch to temporary remote learning in order to protect our staff and students. The criterion for needing to stay home is being within 6 feet of a confirmed person for 15 minutes or longer. So if that is in fact the case, that someone was within 6 feet of a person who is confirmed positive for COVID-19 for 15 minutes or longer, they will need to quarantine for 14 days. And in that case, we would put disinfecting and deep cleaning protocols into place for the space where that child or staff member was. As stated, with any positive cases of COVID-19, we will notify teachers and parents at the earliest possible time in alignment with the Cook County Department of Public Health. We are working on those notification and communication protocols right now. With that, Assistant Superintendent Ross Vittori will talk about our facilities and operations work.
Thank you, Katie. When students arrive to school, staff arrive to school, we will have careful plans for our hallway and entry movement. We will have decals and signage and make sure that we are utilizing our facilities, our spaces, our hallways in a way that will distance students, staff, individuals as much as possible. In regards to learning spaces, we will also be maximizing our square footage so that we can ensure the physical distancing is maximized to the greatest extent. Cleaning protocols will be increased, and deep cleaning will occur throughout each day and evening. The emphasis, of course, will be on areas of high touch and high traffic areas, which we will be trying to reduce within our plan. We will also be providing additional opportunities for sanitizing. We will be maximizing our ability to hand wash, including the exploration of adding additional sinks to schools that don't have as many. We have ordered over 90 pedestal operated hand sanitizing stations that can be moved throughout the building based on changing needs. These are foot operated. We will also be providing teachers with wall-mounted sanitizing options if they don't have a sink in their classroom, as well as hand pump stations for staff to use in small offices or in direct supervision with students. Understanding that we will need the support of both staff and students to keep our rooms disinfected throughout the day, we will also be providing classrooms with additional cleaning materials that can be used as needed or at the end of certain periods. Signage will be made in the languages of English, Spanish, and Polish, and visual supports will be throughout the building, especially in key areas such as entrances and near restrooms. And furniture will also be evaluated by both administration and staff to determine what can be removed to maximize the square footage within our learning spaces. If some common areas, such as the multi-purpose room or the LRC, need to be reconfigured to hold class, or classroom environments have items such as bean bags or soft surfaces or furniture that can be removed to allow us to space out students more effectively, then we will look into providing the opportunity to open up that space. I'll now turn it back to Dr. Ossel.
Thank you. While we have done a great deal of planning to ensure the safety of our staff and students, we also have items that we are still planning for. One of those is lunches. We know that we will need to maximize our use of space for lunches so we can have the greatest possible physical distance between students while they are eating and while they have masks off. So we will be working with our buildings to determine the best possible way to do that, to use every square inch and make sure that our students are appropriately distanced. We also are working on plans for entry and exit to the school so that we don't have large amounts of students congregating in any areas. So we are looking at staggered entry and exit, potentially one grade level at a time or one group at a time over a 10 to 15 minute period, so that we can lessen the amount of people in one space. Another area of continued planning is our specials classes and electives. There are specific protocol from the Illinois Department of Public Health and Illinois State Board of Education that we are working through with various team members to ensure that we can deliver a well-rounded education, but do so safely. And finally, we know that wearing a mask all day will be difficult. And the work that we do in advance of the school year to prepare our students will be crucial. We can practice mask wearing and we can incrementally increase our ability to wear masks for long periods of time, but we still want to plan for breaks whenever possible during the school day. So we are working through schedules that may allow for recess, movement, and mask breaks in a safe manner. With that, I will turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Maureen Maccabee to discuss our instructional plans.
Thank you, Katie. I'd like to share a little bit of the work of our instruction planning team. And what you'll see on this slide are some of the features that are part of option 1, which is full in-person instruction. And these are features that span both K-5 and 6-8. And then after that, we'll take a look at some uniqueness to the schedules for K-5 and 6-8. But at all levels, we will build in a transition period at the start of the year to really allow for that return to school, that transitional time. Students have been out of school for quite a while. We will want to take it slow, build in lots of SEL opportunities, and really help them learn some of these new routines that are going to be needed. So we want to make sure that staff feel that they can take that time and not rush immediately into instruction. Our plans call for a minimum 5-hour instructional day per ISBE requirements. We are going to be looking at emphasizing diagnostic assessments so that we can address learning loss early in the year. So for this year, those diagnostic assessments, such as iReady for math, will take priority over completing the fall FAST benchmark assessments. We want teachers to get that information, have time to look through that information, and plan together for instruction. Obviously, we won't be starting diagnostic assessments on day one. We want children to have that transition, but early in the year, the emphasis will be on diagnostics. We've also been working with our team on revisions to our lesson structures, our daily and weekly schedules, with the aim to have a consistent process and daily routine should we need to switch to remote learning. That way we won't have to completely change the schedule. Kids can still make use of the routines they've developed. We will have daily social emotional learning time. And different than in the past, we will have an attendance process each day. We will account for students' attendance each day and return to our typical grading practices. Whether we're in person or remote, we're going to be emphasizing new instruction, not just previously taught skills, which was our direction in the spring. We know that learning needs to continue. We are going to need to meet them where they are and then build on that. We've also been working this summer on identifying the essential learning targets for each subject, so that we know we're going to have to really prioritize this year, throughout the entire year, most likely, on those essential learning targets and building mastery of those. Some adjustments to the scope and sequences to allow time for that and to allow time for to address skills that were missed last year. That work is also happening this summer, and to just make sure that teachers can focus on those essential skills. Let's take a look at the elementary model on the next slide. This is a draft. This is a visual of how our team is envisioning the day looking like for elementary. The slide shows K2, but the 3 through 5 is very similar with the exception of the phonics, the daily phonics instruction. You will notice that each day, you can see the SEL built in. You notice that 4 days a week, there is a mini lesson, a literacy mini lesson. It might be reading, it might be writing. That will be followed by purposeful practice, conferring, some of those routines that we are used to. Obviously, purposeful practice and conferring in a remote setting might look a little different, but we would still include that. Then we have our typical guided reading block with, and for K2, an explicit phonics time as well, followed by a daily mini lesson for math and specials. In our daily mini lesson for math, you'll notice there's time again for small group instruction, also focusing on what I need during that time through small group instruction. That's going to be really critical for all classes this year, wanting to really, expecting more of a wide variety of needs and being able to address them. You will see that day 5 we have built in, and that is not necessarily Friday. We're just picturing that would be 1 day a week, that we would have an explicit science lesson and social science lesson, as well as a flex block. Teachers are going to discover throughout the week certain other areas that they might need some reteaching or reinforcement, or even just a language building block, some time for our teachers to do that additional language building. This is, and I want to point out, this is for the beginning of the year. We would hope that as things progress, we could expand this schedule, and our science and social science could be more frequently. So this is at the very beginning and minimally during that transition period for K through 5. Here's a model of the junior high schedule. And again, this would be if we are in person or remote. The biggest difference that you'll see is that the 8 periods are divided across 2 days. So students will attend periods 1 through 4 on day 1. And you'll notice that the amount of time is significantly lengthened. Again, allowing time for that small group, that differentiation, that is really challenging to accommodate in a 42-minute class period that is typical. It also reduces the transition. In this scenario, students will move from class to class, but we will be extending that transition period so it is lengthened, so not all students are in the hall at the same time. And then by reducing in half the number of periods each day, we have reduced in half the number of transitions students are making. Again, this would be whether in person or remote, and this is for our initial reentry period. It will be evaluated and modified as time goes on and conditions change. So now taking a look at option 2, which is the full remote, or the remote academy, as we are calling it. You'll notice right away that there are a lot of similarities. In the name of equity, we do want students to have similar experiences, whether they are remote or in person. So the same emphasis on diagnostic assessment and social emotional learning, attendance and grading. Remote academy teachers will use the same learning targets and scope and sequence. Again, as Dr. Fessler mentioned, this is an option for any parent, but they will need to commit to a full grading period to do that, so that we can establish those cohorts, build the relationships and SEL within each of the cohorts. We will need to determine how long this option will be offered. Should conditions change significantly with COVID, we may find that it is no longer needed, and in which case parents would need to return to the in-person instruction. This is also a 5-hour instructional day. It is a combination of virtual or in-person through virtual and assigned work. Teachers will be assigned to virtual classrooms with students at their grade levels. It might be more than one grade level in a cohort, depending on the response. And they could be students in their cohort from across the district, working in that same class or cohort. And then also we are expecting additional ISBE guidance related to remote learning in the near future. They will be coming out with that. We will be following the similar schedule to what the in-person schedule is, to the extent possible. And you can see on this slide that this is kind of what we envision that looking like, in terms of it has a blend of synchronous and asynchronous or live instruction, meaning the synchronous. And then to the extent possible, it will mirror the same schedule followed for in-person instruction. So you can see it looks significantly different than our spring remote learning option. And you'll notice it says approximately 5 hours of engagement with learning, because we know that when it is remote, students will be working at their own pace. Some students might take a little longer or less time to complete the same task. So that is our alternative approach. And now Mr. Gray will share a little bit about how the technology will support our instruction.
In the spring, we utilized Seesaw or Google Classroom primarily as our platforms to support remote learning. We will continue to offer those moving forward, both for in-person learning as well as remote learning opportunities for our students. We're also looking to increase the communication capacity with both of those tools and the usage of those. For example, Google Classroom has the option to notify parents on a daily basis or weekly to give updates on missing assignments and updates on assignments that have been assigned by the classroom teacher. So we will continue to work to increase the usage and the effectiveness of those communication pieces within those platforms. We'll also allow staff to continue to use Google Meet, and we will add Zoom as an option for video conferencing with students who are not able to be in the classroom. We're also working to finalize our digital resources for many of the specific content areas, as well as some of the resources we have available for students and for staff for student communication and project creation. As far as communication, the district in the beginning of the summer transitioned from a weekly update to an every other weekly update on our plans. And over this past week, we have started to increase the frequency of those, and we anticipate the frequency of our communication continuing from this point until the start of school. So you'll see a number of communications coming out related to the planning, related to updates that we get from the state, and continue to provide different mediums such as this of a presentation that we'll share with additional information for parents and continue to keep you updated as we move forward.
Thank you, Ben. I'd like to now discuss the next steps. First of all, we are providing presentations to our full administrative leadership team. We're sharing this information with our staff, and then also this recorded version with our parents. Please note that we will attach these slides, and if you have questions, you may send an email to me directly with any questions that you have. We also are in the final stages of completing a comprehensive plan document. So I recognize, we all recognize that there are likely many additional questions that people will have. Our plan document, which will be roughly 20 pages, and length wasn't our goal, but just comprehensiveness was the plan, will describe and explain all the details of every element of our plan. We would like to get a little more feedback this week from all of our stakeholders in completing that plan. We will also be bringing an e-learning plan to the Board of Education, which is an ISB requirement for approval. And this will allow us in future dates to, when we have an approved plan, to utilize e-learning days in lieu of emergency days. Parents to provide enrollment selection. This would be option 1, in person, or option 2, remote academy by the end of July. More information will be coming out in the very near future about that. Design and provide training opportunities for both parents and staff. And finally, our first student attendance day will be Monday, August 17th. Staff will report on Monday, August 10th. This will provide us 5 full days of training and preparation with our staff and leadership team. Please also note that we have been providing training for staff over the course of the summer, and will be also, as Katie also mentioned, providing training videos and supports for our families and students in the very near future. That concludes our presentation. I'd like to thank everyone for their attention, and I know that there will be follow-up questions. Again, please feel free to email me any questions that you have. Also, in the aftermath of this, we will be sending out surveys. You can also add questions to your survey responses. Thank you.